right, welcome back. Thank you for joining me in the dive deeper, where we're going to dig a little deeper into the scriptures and going to see how Iyov was feeling, right? So now we're in the book of Job. We're in chapters 6 through 7. And let's take a closer look at what Iyov was feeling, right? What he was going through at this time, because he's seriously going through a lot, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Satan has free range to do anything to him except for take his life. And so he is pretty much wishing he was dead. He wants to die. He's at the point where he literally wants to die and he cannot die. He's suffering beyond imagine. He says he wish his frustrations could be weighed, all his calamities laid on his scales, so that he was saying that they would outweigh the sands of the sea. Wow. So in chapter 6, verses 1 through 13, it says here, like in the Cliff Notes, "For the arrows of Shaddai find their mark in me." According to Rashi, Iyov's reference on arrows is that of poison, snake venom, placed on the tips of arrows being flung at him. Although Iyov concludes that Adonai is waging war on him, it is the work of the adversary play here. So we know that, right? We know that, because we're reading this. But him at that time, he didn't know that. And so, and it goes here like in verses 8 through 10, it says, "If only God would decide to crush me." In his despair, Iyov longs for the end of his life. If God would do this, then Iyov would have one point of consolation. He never denies God's words. Despite the voices of his distractors, right, his friends, God does not abandon Iyov or keep him in lifelong suffering. So in verse 13, he says, "Clearly I have no help in myself. Common sense has been driven from me." But he still does not deny God. He still does not refute God or say anything bad about God. He says in verse 14, "A friend should be kind to an unhappy man, even to one who abandons Shaddai." But he didn't abandon Shaddai. So, he still doesn't necessarily know what he did to cause this. And that's one of the things that he mentions here. In verse 28, he says, "So now I beg you, look at me. Would I lie to your face? Think it over. Please don't let me be wrong. Think it over again. My cause is just. Am I saying something wrong? Could I recognize trouble when I taste it?" And in verse 17, he says, "Human life on earth is like serving in the army." In chapter 17, human life on earth is like serving in the army. Yes, we drudge through our days like a hired worker. How many times have you ever felt like a person just drudging through the day on your job, getting through day to day, just a routine of work? Wake up, go to work, come home, do it again, right? Eat in between, bathe in between, sleep in between. And it's just a mundane life. That's kind of like what he's saying here. Like a slave longing for shade, like a worker thinking only of his wages. I'm going to work to get paid so I could pay these bills, house bill, car note, house note, electricity, so on. Go to work, get money, pay off these bills, go to work, do it again. He says in verse 3 in chapter 7, so I am assigned months of meaninglessness. Troubled nights are my lot. Right? Basically what he's been given in life. So he says, while I lie down, I ask, when can I get up? But the night is long and I keep tossing to and fro until daybreak. So he never sleeps. He never gets rest. He's just tossing and turning. In verse 5, my flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. I can't even imagine what that's like. His skin forms scabs that ooze pus. So I'm sure he's looking pretty disgusting at this point. He says in verse 6, my days pass more swiftly than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. So he's feeling hopeless. He's just waiting for the day that he dies. In verse 7, he says, remember that my life is but a breath. My eyes will never again see good times. He's hopeless. The eye that now sees me will see me no more. So he's saying, like, the people who see him, like his friends that he's looking at, he's like, those of you three people that are looking at me, you will see me no more. It's going to come to a time where you just won't see me anymore. This is the end. This is how he feels. So he's basically saying his goodbye to his friends. So he's saying, I will be gone. So he's saying goodbye. Like a cloud dissolving and disappearing. So he who descends to Sheol won't come back up. And as we know it, like in chapter 7, verse 9, it says, so he who descends to Sheol won't come back up. That's the place of the dead. And in the Greek is called Hades. It's referred to 7 times in Job. And the Tanakh revealed, the Tanakh is the Old Testament in the Hebrew language, and reveals Sheol or Sheol not as hell per se, but as a dim, vague state where dead souls wait. Here, Iyov references physical death. Okay? So he's referencing physical death, though. Even though that word means like the place of the dead, not necessarily hell. Okay? Where a soul waits, where dead souls wait. So in verse 10, it says, he will not return again to his house, and his home will know him no more. So one of the things I want to point out here as well, but before I go there, even like in verse 15, he says, I would rather be strangled. Death would be better than these bones of mine. I hate it. I won't live forever. So leave me alone, for my life means nothing. Like he sincerely just wants to die. Okay, we got that. And, we're still in chapter 7, verse 17. It says, what are mere mortals that you make so much of them? So now he's asking God, who is mankind? Who is the humans that you created, that you make so much of them? Why do you keep them on your mind? Why examine them every morning and test them every moment? Won't you ever take your eyes off of me, at least long enough for me to swallow my spit? Do you think God will take his eyes off of you at any moment? No. He's like, you won't even allow me to swallow my spit. You won't even take your eyes off me from any moment. You won't just forget about me. No, God will not. And then in verse 20, he says, suppose I do sin. How do I harm you, you scrutinizer of humanity? Why have you made me your target so that I am a burden to you? So he realizes he has been targeted and he doesn't understand it. He just feels like a burden. He says in verse 21, chapter 7, why don't you pardon my offense and take away my guilt? For soon I will lie down in the dust. You will seek me, but I will be gone. Okay, so from dust we were created, and from dust we will return, right? All right. So moving on into chapter 8, some of the cliff notes that are here. So in chapter 8 is when his friend Bildad speaks, and he's Bildad from Shukini or Shukai. And he speaks next, and that starts in chapter 8. And Iyov's second friend is identified as a Shuahite. According to the cuneiform tablets, the region of the Shukai people was near the Euphrates River. According to some, and this is not in the Bible, right? But according to some, Bildad was the son of Abraham and Keturah. And it says is a reference in Genesis 25, chapter 25, verse 2. So if we were to cross over to Genesis, Genesis chapter 25, verse 2, it says Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zinran, Yokshan, Median, Midan, Yeshbak, and Shukah. And you can, Father. So then it doesn't say anything about Bildad. His name is not here in the Holy Scriptures. So that is, we can say that's hearsay, but it's written somewhere else. So, but that doesn't, if it's not in the Holy Scriptures, okay. And then in we're still in chapter 8 and verse 2 of Iyov in the book of Job, the book of Iyov. So in chapter 8, verse 2, it says, what you are saying is raging wind. So this is his friend talking now. The attack of raging wind reveals Bildad's contempt for Iyov in his suffering. He believes Iyov would do anything to deflect God's justice. Thus, Iyov's complaints are no more than puffs of wind that vanish away. Okay. These are not the kind of friends, you would want at your bedside while you're suffering. His friends are, they're just, they think he did, he's in the wrong. Whatever he did, he upset God and he did something wrong. He even says in verse 20 in chapter 8, look, God will not reject a blameless man, nor will he uphold wrongdoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. Those who hate you will be clothed with shame, and the tent of the wicked will cease to exist. Okay, so I'm sure Iyov doesn't want to hear this, because he's suffering. And then he responds. And so we're going into chapter 9. And his response is, indeed, I know that this is so. But how can a human win a case against God? Whoever might want to argue with him could not answer him one question in 1,000. His heart is so wise, his strength so great. Who can resist him and succeed? So in chapter 9, verses 1 through 4, it says, how can a human win a case against God? Iyov upheld the sovereignty of God while lamenting his plight and suffering. According to Rashi, who can resist him and succeed? Is comparable to the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Right? We haven't gotten there yet, but then there's, when Moses went to Pharaoh, and was saying, let my people go, his heart was hardened, but God hardened his heart so that he would say no. And that is, you can find that in Exodus 9, chapter 9, verse 12. So here, continuing, it says, by Iyov making this point, he confirms that despite his suffering, he never hardens his heart toward God. His heart is never hardened towards God. He just accepts this punishment that he's been given. So he feels like he's being punished. He doesn't know why, but he's accepting it because he's had such a blessed life and such a good life. And whatever he did to deserve this from God, he's accepting it. And he's not hardening his heart toward God. In verse 15, he says, if I were right, I wouldn't answer. Because he says, in verse 14, he says, how much less can I answer him and select my arguments against him? Like, who would argue with God? You ever heard the saying, like, your arms are too short to box with God? Like, who will argue with God? You would just be like, okay, God, you got that. I'm wrong. You got that. And in verse 15, he says, if I were right, I wouldn't answer. Like he's saying, even if I felt like I was right and this is undue, this is an undue curse. Like he's saying, like, if God is saying, boom, you deserve this, or this is your lot, your case, what I'm giving you, your portion. He's saying that I'm not going to argue with God because he knows that God is a just God. He said, I could only ask for mercy from my judge. So thank God we're given grace and mercy, right? In verse 16, he says, even if I summoned him and he answered me, I still can't believe he would listen to my plea. Wow. He could break me with a storm. He could multiply my wounds for no reason, to the point where I couldn't even breathe. With such bitterness, he could fill me. So he doesn't have any bitterness towards God. So in chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, even if I'm right, my own mouth will condemn me. Like they say when a person's being arrested, anything you say can be used against you. So he's saying his own mouth would condemn him. So he's better off not saying anything. According to the sages, this is Iyov's defense. Iyov feels his mouth will condemn him because his words will be silenced. Verse 22 is a reminder that both good fortune and calamity can befall the righteous and evildoer alike. In verse 21, he says, I am innocent. Don't I know myself? But I have had enough of this life of mine. So I say it's all the same. He destroys innocent and wicked alike. When disaster brings sudden death, he laughs at the plight of the innocent. The earth has been given over to the power of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. If it isn't he, then who is it? In verse 32, He says, "For he is not merely human like me. There is no answer that I could give him. If we were to come together in court, there is no arbitrator between us. Who could lay his hand on us both?" Right? Because we're here on earth. And who would stand in between us and God? I mean, this was, of course, in the times before Jesus came and became our intercessor between the Father and the believer, because now we have Jesus that stands there in that spot, that intercedes on our behalf and goes to God on our behalf. And basically he is the person who goes to God and says, he pleads a case for us. That's who we have now as believers in Christ Jesus, is that person that's between us and the Father, the bridge, right? Someone who goes to the Father on our behalf and pleads a case for us and understands truly what that we've gone through, okay? And what temptation is like. And he who not sinned has felt every type of temptation that you could possibly feel. And yet he did not sin. But it doesn't mean that he wasn't tempted. He had temptation. He knows what temptation feels like. And he who was tempted did not sin. And he's the one who pleads cases on our behalf for us to God. So this wraps it up. Tomorrow we'll go into a chapter 10 and read some more. Let's see what happens with Iyov. Job. I hope you enjoy your day, and make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you can receive when the next videos drop. And it's been a pleasure hanging out with you guys. Talk to you later. Bye.